Hello, this is the lecture for covering theater conventions and structures. You can find this presentation in Blackboard in Module 1. If you need to print out, take notes, etc., all this information is available to you in Module 2 on Blackboard. So let's jump right in. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly do I mean by theater conventions? Really, the term theater convention just means ideas, terminology, structures, spaces, and so forth that are conventional to theater. That when you go into any theater situation, you're going to find the vocabulary, the spaces, and so forth discussed in this lecture to be used in those spaces and in those contexts. So here we go. Theater conventions. So let's talk about the word theater in and of itself. Okay, you've likely seen these two different spellings of theater, T-H-E-A-T-R-E and T-H-E-A-T-E-R. So what's the difference? Is there a difference? Doesn't matter. Okay, so theater ending in RE is customarily used when referring to the art form in the abstract, an idea, a concept, a subject. For example, the name of the class that you're in is theater, spelled with an RE at the end, appreciation. Theater with an ER is customarily used when referring to a specific building or location. It's something concrete, like I am going to Cape Fear Regional Theater. That's the custom. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is universally how you will find the word spelled in those contexts. Both spellings are correct and acceptable for use in written work in this class. There is not a difference in pronunciation of these two spellings. And honestly, the most likely difference in the spelling probably originated as American English evolved from British English. So the ER at the end is a more American spelling, and the RE at the end is a more British or Canadian spelling. But the most important thing to remember is either one is correct, either one is acceptable. Okay, let's look at the distinction between these three words: play, production, and performance. So they are related, they are connected, but they are not necessarily the same. Okay, a play is a written work intended for performance. It's the story, the characters, the setting, as determined by the playwright. A production is one specific adaptation of the play with a particular director, cast, and creative team. Produced at a particular location or a set of locations. Sometimes a production might tour. So it might be produced, performed at multiple locations, but it's still the same production. A production can have several performances. They range from 2 to 3 performances in 1 week to hundreds of performances over years. So in the case of Broadway's The Lion King, it's been on stage over 20 years, has been performed hundreds of times, and there are touring companies, but it is considered that it is all the same production. It's the same story, the same characters, the same costume design, the same set, even though it's different people portraying those characters. Okay, final word, performance. This is one specific event in which a play is performed on a given day at a particular time. This is a completely unique event and it can only happen once. Even when a production has multiple performances, as we mentioned before, each one is completely unique because the audience is the element that changes every time. Okay, let's look at types of theaters. So, not all theater looks the same, and we're going to talk about all those differences. So I'm not going to read to you verbatim the information on these slides because, as I said, you have access to this. So you can look at these distinctions on your own, but I wanted to make sure you know sort of in American theater, and these terms are specifically American theater. There are going to be slight variations to the types of theaters in other parts of the world. And we'll actually explore a little bit of that later this semester. But for now, we are focusing specifically on American theater. So Broadway is kind of the major leagues of American theater, if you will. It's considered to be the best of the best. When you have performed on Broadway or had a play performed on Broadway, you have sort of, it's considered you have arrived. You have reached the pinnacle, if you will. So then you have off Broadway, off Broadway. I have even heard and seen people refer to off Broadway. I think that might be getting a bit nitpicky, but we have different interpretations sometimes of the terminology. Resident professional theater is high level, high quality professional theater, but it's outside of New York City. The Broadway distinctions indicate that they are in New York City, in that theater district, or they're the theaters, whether they're off Broadway or off Broadway, has an indication that there is some proximity to the theater district in New York City. They're not in it, but they're nearby. Resident professional theaters or regional theaters are located all over the country. And then we get to community theater, educational theater, and non-traditional theater. And you can read those definitions at your leisure. Of course, Fayetteville Technical Community College is an educational theater. Just to sort of see how our institution fits into this dynamic. So now that we've looked at the types of theaters, let's look at types of stages. Again, not all theaters look the same. There are a few different types of stage, which is, of course, the performance space. One way to tell, the way to tell one type of stage from another is the location of the audience in relation to the stage. There are five primary types of stage: proscenium, thrust, arena, black box, and flexible or found spaces. So the proscenium is the most common type of stage. As is pictured here, the audience is all on one side of the stage. Okay, this is, if you've been to a theater before for a play or a ballet or a concert of any kind, this is most likely the type of theater you went to. Next, you have a thrust stage. In a thrust stage, audience is on three sides of the stage. As you can see pictured here, the stage looks longer. From the back wall, it comes out farther, and the audience is sort of wrapped around three sides of the stage. Thrust stages are less common because they present some challenges that proscenium stages don't. You would be limited in the size and placement of set pieces or scenery. Someone, an actor standing on the end of the stage, the one in sort of the foreground closest to the bottom of this picture, would have their back to a significant portion of the audience, which isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it does present a bit of a challenge. So, so they're not as common. Thrust stages are not as common as proscenium stages. But I've seen some plays on a thrust stage, and they can do some interesting things. Sort of a fascinating endeavor, or at least I think so. Okay, third type of stage is an arena. This is also referred to as theater in the round. The audience in an arena stage is on all four sides, so they are completely surrounding the performance space. Not all, but many arena stages are set up like the one in this picture, where the stage is actually the lowest point in the room and the audience is above it and moves up from there. whereas in some proscenium stages, at least the first couple of rows are at the same level or even slightly below the level of the stage. This presents even more challenges than a thrust stage, hence arena stages are fairly uncommon. But plays done in that style in the round on an arena stage are pretty interesting. It just creates a different aesthetic and a different dynamic as the actors relate to the audience. Also, it's fairly common with an arena stage, as you can tell, this is of the 3 pictures we've looked at, so the smallest stage. Just sort of a point of observation. Okay, the 4th type is a black box. This is usually a fairly small, flexible space without fixed or permanent seating or performance space. The arrangement can be changed to suit many different productions' needs. These are often found in educational theater programs. Lots of colleges in particular have black boxes. Some high school programs do. If you notice, it looks like, based on what you can see in this photo, that it's set up in an arena configuration with audience on all 4 sides. It could be audience on 3 sides. It's sort of hard to tell on the left side of the picture if that's seating or if that's part of the stage. But notice the room is probably not terribly big. The lighting is all above, sort of fills the entire ceiling, if you will. But the seats they're chairs, they're not fixed to the ground, so they could be moved so that they're all on one side and it's more of a proscenium setup, or it could be set up in a thrust configuration. But having everything be black at its foundation, the floor, the ceiling, the walls, in this case, it also looks like the seating is black, just provides a blank canvas, if you will. This could be anything. We could add pieces and decoration and so forth to turn this room into just about anything we needed it to be. And finally, we have flexible or found spaces. These can be anywhere: restaurants, parks, churches, museums, libraries, malls, etc. Sweet Tea Shakespeare, which is a Fayetteville-based theater company, doesn't have a permanent location, but uses found spaces, such as the Fayetteville Botanical Gardens, the Poe House, and Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, which is pictured here. They sometimes perform in restaurants or bars. So really the sky's the limit. As long as a space has an area where the actors can be and an area where the audience can be to see the actors and hear them, that could potentially be turned into a theater space. Okay, now let's zoom in even more so and look at the areas of a theater. And we're going to talk about this in terms of public space versus private space. Okay, so the public spaces are areas that are available to the audience. So if you go and see a play and you walk into the building, there are going to be parts of that building that are accessible to you and parts of that building that are off limits for you as the audience. So those public spaces are going to be the front of house or lobby, the concessions area, that's usually part of the lobby, restrooms, and the house. This is the term we use when we're talking about the seating area of the performance space. And then you have the private spaces. These are areas that are only available or accessible to the theater personnel, the cast, the crew, the theater staff. This includes the stage itself, the backstage area, and the control booth. We use backstage as sort of a catch-all term for anywhere that is not visible to the audience. So backstage, we may initially think just means the area behind the stage or at the back of the stage, but really it's anywhere in the theater that is not visible to the audience or accessible to the audience, but is accessible to the cast, the crew, and the theater staff during the performance. Okay, so let's look at a little map of theater space. Now, this is a map of the actual performance space. Okay, so at the very bottom of this diagram, you have three areas: house left, house, audience, and house right. So the house is, as I said before, where the audience sits during the performance. Okay, and we use the directions left and right to indicate where we are proximity within that space when you are facing the stage. So it's the audience's left or right while they're facing the stage. Okay. The rest of the picture, from that curved line at the bottom to the top of the image, that is the private space. The area is only available and accessible to the theater personnel, the cast, the crew, and the theater staff. So most of this, everything within those dotted lines or dashed lines and below, to that all the way down to that curved line, is the stage, the acting area, the playing area. Okay. Now you may be looking and thinking, okay, the stage right and left, this is a typo. That's not right because they've got stage right on the left-hand side. Okay, this is actually correct because we determined those stage directions: right, left, up, and down. And we'll talk about upstage and downstage in just a moment. But left and right are determined by the actor's perspective when they're facing the audience. Okay, so if you can imagine on this diagram a person standing on stage facing the audience, where it says audience and on the diagram, and a person in the house facing the stage, the acting area or playing area. So they're mirroring each other, so their left and right are going to be different. So this diagram actually is accurate. Hopefully it's not too confusing. Okay, so upstage and downstage are also determined by the actor's position on stage while they're facing the audience. Okay, downstage is closer to the audience and upstage is away from the audience. The reason we use those terms is because once upon a time, many, many years ago, when theaters were first built on indoors, we'll learn a lot about this throughout the semester, but the very earliest, oldest theaters were actually outside. But then over the centuries, people started building them inside. And some of the earliest stages that we know about built in Europe, the stages were built on a rake or at an angle. So the area closest to the audience was lower than the area farthest from the audience, the back wall, if you will. That was higher. So when you were walking from the edge of the stage closest to the audience towards the back wall of the stage, you were literally walking up. So that's why we call that up stage. And when you came the other way and you're coming closer to the audience, you're literally walking down. So that's why we call it downstage. Even though most stages now are built level and the audience is on an angle, we've still stuck with those terms, with the use of the term upstage and downstage as a way to indicate where you are on stage. Okay, so you see on the other side of that dotted line, where it says off left wings and off right wings and crossover, those are the backstage areas in this diagram. So those would not be accessible or visible to the audience. That dashed line is probably going to be made up of a series of curtains or other scenery to block the view of the audience from backstage, so that they only see what we want them to see as the performers and the crew on stage. One final area that I want to talk about is the control booth. It's not included on this diagram. This is the room or the space where lights, sound, and some special effects are controlled from. It's usually at the back or in the center of the house. So let's look at some pictures of control booth. So the top picture, the top left picture, is taken from the stage at a theater. And if you look and see, there are 3 small windows at the back of the house behind the seats, or beside some of them, but at the back of the house. Those on the other side of those windows are the control booth. Okay. And then the bottom right picture that you're looking at is from the inside of a control booth. So, and what you're looking at is the light board. So this is where all the lights would be controlled. We turn them on, we turn them off. We change the color, the intensity, and so forth, so on. So we'll talk more about lighting design later in the semester, but this is what that view looks like from the control booth. And very often we just refer to this space as the booth, but the sort of official name of it would be the control booth. So that takes us through a overview of some of the primary terms and vocabulary and structures and overall conventions of theater. And so hopefully that clarified anything. If you have any questions, you're of course free to share those on the discussion board in Blackboard or email to me directly. And as a reminder, you do have access to this PowerPoint in Blackboard in Module 1. Cool.